Hi, my name is Greg Farrar, and as part of my work at Joby Aviation, I've been looking at COVID-19 data. And I've been doing some analyses. At Joby, like everywhere, we want to know what's going on with this virus. And in particular, I've been focusing on the question of what does it bring? What does the future bring? What are the trends that we're going to see worldwide in the United States and in California? Joby is located in California, so I do have a focus on California, but this presentation is going to go through 3 stages. First of all, a worldwide analysis. Secondly, an analysis of the United States at the state level. And finally, an analysis of California at the county level. So we're going to start at the country level. We're going to look at the whole world, broken down by countries. The data I'm using here is from ourworldindata.org. Thank you, ourworldindata.org, for curating and providing this information to the public. I'm using the Databricks platform to do the analysis. Thank you, Databricks. And I'm using Plotly, the library, to actually draw these graphs. And thank you, Plotly, for doing such nice, interactive, simple graphs that I don't have to do them myself. So, first graph here is the number of new cases by country. And if you look at this graph, you see this is what the news will tell you usually. United States has taken the lead. And by the way, I'm not doing total cases. I don't care so much about total cases. I'm looking for the trends, and I'm looking for when this will end. And so the daily cases is much more of an indicator of that than the total cases. So the United States leads in total daily cases, total new daily cases, new cases every day, followed by Spain and Italy. These are what you hear about on the news. But I'm actually more interested in the breakdown by population, because if a big country has 100 cases, or a very, very small country has 100 cases, it's completely different. It's much worse for the small country. And so the way to compare countries is to adjust by population. This graph does that by showing the total number of new daily cases per million people. When you do that, you see that Spain is actually the leader, followed by Switzerland. These are the countries that have the highest number of new daily cases per million people. And as you go down this list, Germany, Belgium, you start to see the trend, which is these are all Europe. Netherlands, Norway, and it takes quite a while before you get down to the United States, which is behind the European countries, is the country that has the most new cases per million. So the lesson here, which is no big surprise, is Europe has it bad. Europe is in trouble. Europe is not currently peaking. And Europe is the epicenter of the epidemic. The United States may be the upcoming epicenter, we hear that, but Europe is currently the worst. Moving on to this graph, though, this is my favorite graph, and this is the one that if there's one reason I'm actually doing this, is to show this graph, because I haven't seen anything like this. And I think this gives a good answer to the question that I care about most, which is, when is this going to end? I want to know when it's going to end. And this graph really gives you a heads up, I think. So what this graph is showing is what the growth is of daily new cases by country. So if a country has 100 cases today, and it has 120 cases tomorrow, that's a 20% daily growth. It'll show up as 0.2, 20% is 0.2, 30% is 0.3, and so on. So I'm going to zoom in on this a little bit, because it does show, I think, better when you get closer. Actually, I want to include that little loop, though. No, I'm not going to bother. That's sort of an outlier. So if you look at some of these lines, some of them are going upwards, like Sweden here. Sweden has got a pretty bad situation going on right now. They've got 20% daily growth, and worse, their daily growth is increasing. So if this continues, next week they might have 30% daily growth. Every single day, 20% more. Every single day, 30% more than the day before in new cases. That's bad. And also we see this with, no, that's not, I can't grab this, with Iran. Iran is showing an upward trajectory as well, and South Korea, sadly, after doing very well in containing their outbreak to begin with, is showing an upward tick in the growth of their daily cases. Now, that said, South Korea is still doing quite well because this is the all-important line here, 0. The 0 line is the place where when a country is at 0, they have no growth daily. The number of daily cases is each day is the same as the previous day. And that means they're not growing out of control. They're growing linearly, which still isn't great, but they're not growing exponentially. They've turned the corner. They've turned the corner in their daily growth graph. And when they hit 0, we can generally expect they're going to continue to do better and start going negative in their growth rate. So a few days ago, 4 days ago, South Korea was at 0. And so they were doing very well. They had a flat growth rate. If we look over here, we can see that Italy and Switzerland are the winners at this point. These are the ones who are really doing well because their growth rate is negative, slightly negative, but still negative. Every day, on average, they're seeing fewer and fewer cases. That's particularly interesting for Italy because Italy has been in the news as the worst case. Now, Italy has it really bad for sure. Things are not great in Italy, but at least one thing that is doing great in Italy is the shape of this curve. They had, a week ago, they were having 20% new cases every single day. Now they're actually, they've crossed 0. They've reached the top of their daily growth curve. They've turned the corner. And so that's really good for Italy. Now, if you look at United States, well, it's trending downward, so that's nice, but it's still up at 20%. I'll go back to the United States in a minute. So the nice thing about the United States is that, well, actually, I'm going to zoom in here and show you let me zoom out first. And just point out that I really should not miss Australia. Australia is the worst. It's out of control. It's at 50% growth rate and just getting worse. So the worst of all here is Australia, and we don't have very good news for Turkey either, though this is flailing so much that who knows, it may just be the data is kind of wild. But looking at the middle cluster here, the main thing that I notice here is that the general trend is downward. We're seeing more down than up. There are some flat ones like the United Kingdom and Belgium, which are relatively high and flat, which isn't great because that means their growth rate's going to continue at a fairly high level. But then you have all of these ones that are trending downwards. And those ones that are clearly headed towards the place where they'll turn the corner. Again, Switzerland and Italy have already turned the corner. In the case of the United States, zooming out a bit, we see that they have not turned the corner. The United States still is even a few days ago, was showing, well, a 15% daily growth rate. But if this trend heads downward, we can guess it's going to hit 0 in 7 or 8 days. So for the United States, the trend as of today, which could change, is that in 7 or 8 days, the United States will turn the corner. This may be surprising, given some of the news that I see, but the United States appears to be headed towards a week from now, about somewhere in early April, turning the corner where the growth rate of new cases drops to 0. And so that we have the same number of new cases each day. That's not great. We're still having a linear growth. We're still having a lot of cases, but it's not exponential. And that's when you turn the corner and when you start heading down. And then in the weeks that follow, hopefully the United States will see the growth rate go negative and the number of new cases drop each day, which is what happened in China and South Korea originally. So looking at this broadly then, it appears to me that we're seeing a ribbon of downward trends for most countries. The downward angle of this graph appears to indicate that most countries in the world as a whole are headed for a good place where they turn a corner and get out of this epidemic mode and into a recovery mode. So that is the country breakdown. For the second section here, we're going to look at the states of the United States. We're going to break things down by states. In this case, I'm using coronadatascraper.com as my data source. Thank you. Coronadatascraper.com has a army of volunteers who are looking through websites all over to find these numbers and enter them into data sources and make them public in a way that anyone can use them. And I am using them. And that's how we get these graphs, thanks to coronadatascraper.com. So if you look at these, at this top graph, this is the total. I didn't even bother to show the total. I don't really care about the total, but if you do, here's the total. New York completely dominates everyone else in the United States. The state of New York totally dominates the rest in the total cases. More interesting to me then is the number of new daily cases. New York also completely dominates the rest of the United States in the number of new cases. New York has it bad. But again, as with countries, what's more interesting, I think, is per capita. New York is a very populous state, and so the per capita coronavirus could potentially have been very different than the total when compared with other states. The question is does New York have a lot of cases because it's very populous, or does it have a lot of cases because it's in deep trouble? The answer is the latter from this graph. New York, even adjusted for population, is in deep trouble. They have way more cases. It's not quite as dramatic as the graphs above, but they have way more cases than anyone else. 3 times as many new cases every day, even adjusted for population. Louisiana is second. We have Massachusetts, Michigan, and the rest are relatively minor compared to New York. New York is the dominant factor here. And so we come back to my favorite graph again. By the way, don't touch your face if you have coronavirus, or if you don't have coronavirus, like I just did. This is a public service announcement. Don't touch your face. In the case of this graph, my favorite graph, we see the states as we did it for countries, but this time it is broken down by the daily change of the new cases. The number of the percent change in new cases by state. So again, if a state has 100 cases one day and 120, that's a 0.2 increase, a 20% increase. I'm going to zoom in here a little bit more because I do think this gets more interesting when you zoom it. And we see that here Massachusetts has an upward trend, which is dire. Not only do they have new cases every day, not only do they have more new cases every day than they had the previous day, but that's actually accelerating. We're seeing 60%, 50%, really high numbers for Massachusetts. Things are bad in Massachusetts. They are not turning the corner anytime soon. Similarly with Nevada, also pretty bad. But again, this zero line is the important line. When states drop below zero, things are looking good for them. They've turned the corner. They're starting their recovery. And the states that have turned the corner here are Washington. Good news, because Washington was where it started worst. They have turned the corner. I'll show you the total graph for Washington here. Washington alone, the total graph is not too bad in terms of daily change. They actually never got too bad, but they are now doing even better. And I think it's some of their worst times were before I started tracking on March 8th. I do have data farther back than this, but the interesting stuff has mostly been recent weeks. And recent weeks are enough to give me the trend of when things are going to change. So zooming in again, we have Washington and Tennessee as the winners. But the nice thing here again is that almost all these are pointing downward, which means that even though they have new cases every day, and even though the number of cases is growing, new cases is growing every day, the growth rate is dropping. And so they're trending towards this zero line, where when they hit it, and trends suggest they will eventually hit it, when they hit it, then they've reached the peak. It's no longer an epidemic exponentially, and they can begin the recovery process as the daily curve flattens out and starts to drop. Best one here is Arizona. Yeah, Arizona, if I'm seeing this right, Arizona is doing very well and tending towards zero. They're dropping quickly. Arizona could reach their peak in a day or two. But all of these are trending downward. They're all heading towards a peak in a few days. Well, actually, that's an overstatement. Some of these really could be weeks away for their individual state peaks. Now, for California, not so good. California has a 20% growth rate. And again, I'm in California and my focus is on California, which is why I'm going to be talking more about California in the third section as well. California has a 20% growth rate, but the growth rate is growing. So they have more cases every day, 20% every day, and they have more and more growth every day of that 20% number. So California is looking bad. No end in sight for California. As we saw in the last section, the country as a whole is trending towards zero in maybe 7 or 8 days, but no thanks to California, it's thanks to New York and all the work they're doing there and testing and everything they're doing in New York. New York is the one that's really bad right now and is getting better. California is not so bad, but it's not getting better. So something needs to be improved in California. Maybe some more testing would be the solution. And the rest of these all heading downward. A few exceptions, and some of these don't have data. Illinois was going pretty badly a few days ago, and with Chicago there, the news is probably not great in Illinois even now. New Jersey, also not looking great, but we don't have data or the trend line at least. But let's look at New Jersey. I thought I saw that New Jersey was looking a little better. Yeah, missing some data. Hard to say about New Jersey. There was a period a few days ago when it seemed like New Jersey had actually dropped below zero. They were doing well, but in spite of doing quite poorly for a while there. But now they've got a new spike, and so these trend lines can change. The trends, even if it's trending downwards, no promise, no guarantee that the United States is going to be all better or over the bump in a week, but that's where the trends are pointing right now. And right now, New Jersey is anyone's guess, I think. Very good numbers. No, actually, that's just they're just missing some data here. So the upshot of it all is few states are doing poorly. Most are doing well in the sense that they're heading towards a peak, these trends show when that peak will arrive, and it looks like for the whole country, maybe a week. Individual states, it can be already here, it could be a few days, or it can be a few weeks. That is the breakdown by state. So finally, we come to the counties of California. I'm in California, Joby Aviation, which funded this. My employer is in California, and so my focus here is on California. As before, data provided by coronaDataScraper.com. Now, if we look at the total California cases, we can see that Los Angeles is leading, Santa Clara, San Diego. But again, to me, I don't care about the total so much. Looking at trends, I'm more interested in the new cases and then the new cases by population. Briefly looking at the new cases, Los Angeles has the most new cases, Santa Clara, Orange County. But things get, I think, more relevant when we get into the new cases per million. So by population then, adjusted by population, the counties that have the worst situations are Santa Clara in the lead, San Francisco, San Mateo. These are all sounding pretty Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area-like, Marin, San Luis Obispo, and as we go down, we see some of those are smaller counties that don't have a lot of cases. So because they have a large number per capita, they're showing up strongly here, which is what we like. Los Angeles is in the middle of the pack. They have a lot of cases, as you see in the graphs above, but they also have a lot of people, and so they're doing pretty well, really, in terms of cases. They're not running away like New York State. Which runs away even at the per capita level. So Los Angeles doing all right. No one here is doing great because almost all of these are actually showing an upward trend of new cases, more new cases every day. But still, Los Angeles, you hear in the news, is the leader, but not really. Santa Clara, San Francisco, those are the ones that are actually leading in terms of how many they have per person, per capita, per million. And then again, my favorite graph, which is the one that I think actually gives a sense of when these things are going to end, when this catastrophe is going to be over. I'm going to zoom in again. This again is the graph of the growth rates over time. And so, for instance, here we have Riverside with which is currently averaging a 60% day-over-day growth in the number of new cases. That is huge. That is problematic. It probably won't last. I sure hope it doesn't last. But right now, Riverside has a problem. It seems like maybe it's leveling off, but still going up. So Riverside has a problem. And we have Contra Costa, Santa Clara, Los Angeles. These are all certainly problematic as well. The general trend here is that these are all pointing upwards, which is bad, very bad. It means that not only do they have cases, a lot of new cases every day, not only do they have more new cases every day, but they have more new cases every day. So if they have 100 new cases every day, and they added 20%, then maybe the next day they're going to have 40% more than they had the previous day, and the next day they'll have 45% more than the previous day, and 50% more than the previous day. So an upward trend here is bad. These lines have got to level off and drop down to the zero line before there's we can say in any sense that we've reached a peak. So the counties of California not doing well, which is not surprising because as we saw, California as a whole is not reaching a peak. It's not doing very well. Eventually it will. These things will peak. They will drop, but we can't tell from here when that might be. And so though the United States, as we saw in the first section, is heading for a peak in 7 or 8 days, according to the trend line, which is subject to change as well. So don't don't do anything radical. Stay in your houses if you're ordered to shelter in place. That's no need to change anything. Follow the government's orders. But in 7 or 8 days, maybe the government will start to say, "Oh, we're coming to a peak, and we can in a few more weeks we can lift some of the most extreme restrictions." Not yet, but not in California, because California is not even coming to a peak. The United States is, California isn't, and as you can see, the reason is that that California isn't peaking is that really none of its counties are, with a few exceptions. We see a pretty good trend line here for Sonoma County, Alameda County, probably, though, yeah, there's Alameda County is doing pretty well. Alameda County has not only, I'm going to zoom in again, Alameda has not only peaked, but it's actually well below the zero line, that all-important zero line. Some of these counties, a few of them are below zero, which means that they have peaked. These counties have peaked, and they're headed even lower. They're gonna see fewer and fewer cases if these trends persist. So the good news then is Sacramento, Sonoma, Alameda have at this point peaked. Really hard to say with Sacramento, but at least it's not looking terrible. But the rest of them are looking terrible, and it's gonna be some days at least, before we can say that we're over the hill. I didn't mention testing in the last one. I'll mention just briefly here. There is a little bit of testing data provided, but not enough for me to really say anything about it. There are certain counties that are doing testing, and that's good. Testing is good. I'll say that about it. This data is not complete enough for me to say anything about, to really compare counties. But New York State is doing a great job with testing. The United States as a whole isn't doing that well compared to other countries, but we're picking it up. We seem to be trying hard, and I think it is testing that's driving these things over the hill and getting us towards that all-important zero line. So that's the breakdown by county. News isn't great. If people like, I'll bring this information back on as much as a daily basis, and we can see how these trends continue. That's the county news for California on coronavirus. I'm Greg Farrar. This was funded by Joby Aviation, my employer. And again, thank you to Corona Data Scraper and Our World in Data and Databricks and Plotly and all the other pieces and components, that all the volunteers that contributed indirectly to this.